today I'm going to be showing you how to make this 1/12 scale bedroom armchair. And I'm calling it a bedroom armchair because I'm actually making it for the bedroom of a little log cabin. And I just think this style would be more suitable to a bedroom than a sort of living room, or just a little sort of occasional chair, that type of thing. And it's fairly easy to make. For the actual structure of the chair, you just need two sizes of wood, and that's a 2.5mm thick sheet and a 5x5 strip. So that's 3/32 of an inch thick for the sheet and 13/64 of an inch thick, if I remember rightly, for the strip. But I'll put all the measurements you need there in the cutting list. And a lot of people have said if I could do the centimetres as well, but putting 3 lots of measurements in there is a bit much. So for the centimetres, if you work in centimetres, you would just times the or divide the millimetre measurement I give by 10. So divide the millimetre measurement by 10 to get your centimetre measurement. So that's quite an easy one. So I won't put centimetres as well, as there'll be too much information in the cutting list. But I'll put it inches and millimetres. And then wood glue. I use this trusty old Gorilla wood glue, but any sort of PVA that you favour. And I use the wood glue for the fabric as well, but you might want to use your own sort of fabric glue, anything that bonds quite quickly. You don't want to be waiting around too long to attach the next piece of fabric. As you know by now, I use a cocktail stick to apply my glue. I put a little bit of glue onto a piece of card and apply it from there, just makes it easier to do. A nice sharp pencil for accurate marking, steel rule, obviously for measuring and for cutting your wood, along with your craft knife. And you can find tips for cutting wood in another of my videos, so just search my videos, just click on the button above and you'll find a whole long list of videos. I've got 80, I think this will be 81 on here now, and you'll find one called Tips for Working with Wood. Lots of useful information in there for cutting wood. The knife I use is this Swan Morton craft knife, which takes a size 10A blade, and that sort of cuts wood comfortably up to 3mm thick. Anything above 3mm and you'd need to use probably an electric power tool to cut it with. And for the strip wood, use a mitre block and saw to cut that with. You won't get through that with the craft knife either, and if you do, you'll make a jagged edge. So it's always best to use a saw for any sort of strip wood. Varnish I've used here on the legs, but you could use a wood dye. I'll be doing a separate video about wood dye soon as well, or obviously paint, depending on the style of your room that you want to put the chair into. A couple of grades of sandpaper, something a bit harsher for shaping the legs. We just put those into a bit of a point, make them a little bit more interesting. And then a fine grade for sort of sanding the wood after you've cut it, just get nice straight edges there. And then for the upholstery part, you'll need a nice fabric. Choose something with a small pattern to fit the scale. Bear in mind, if you're using a check or a stripe, you need to match it up. So if this is your first go, maybe just use sort of a nice pattern, a floral pattern or something, which you don't have to worry about matching it up. And then once you're sort of used to making them, you could try the stripe or the check that needs matching up. It's just because it's something else you need to think about as you go along. And then for the cushion here, I've used a 6mm upholstery foam. It's a nice supple foam, as you can see there, and that's 6mm or 1/4 of an inch thick. And then just a double-sided tape, which makes attaching the fabric to the cushion a bit easier. And you'll need another piece of card for the bottom of the cushion as well. Obviously scissors, you'll need a brush for your varnish, all the sort of basic things that you'll have in your toolbox. I think that's everything. And I just want to say I'm turning my Etsy shop into a one-stop shop. So eventually I want to stock everything you'll need for all of the tutorials that I show you. So do pop along there. I now stock all the wood, the sheet wood, the strip wood, Gorilla Glue, the rulers, the craft knives, not the pencils yet, the double-sided tape and masking tape, which you'll also need actually, in my shop. So pop along to my shop and please give me a favourite on there, and then when I get in all the new products I can let you know. And I think that's it, so let's get started. Okay, so we're going to begin by attaching the two side pieces and the two back pieces. Now the only reason I've done these as two 2.5 pieces is because we need the 5mm thickness to match the thickness of the legs, but it's very difficult to cut 5mm thick sheet, so that's just why I've done it in two parts like that. No technical reason, but if you do use power tools, you can just substitute these two pieces for one 5mm thick piece, or 13/64 of an inch thick. Okay, so I've dispensed some glue here onto a piece of card. I'm going to use a cocktail stick to apply it with. So just apply it to one of the side pieces. Make sure you get it right to the corners along the edges. And then just stick the two pieces together. So try and line them up with your fingers, make sure it's all square. If you've got any sort of beveled edges from the knife blade, then we can sand those off afterwards, but just get it together like that and then use a couple of clamps to hold it together. Otherwise that will try to pull apart as the glue is drying. I'll just pop that over there to dry and do the other two pieces. Okay, so we're now going to join together the two back pieces exactly the same way. Pop that down there. Oops, I've got a bit too much there. And once again, make sure that you're getting the glue right along the edges and into the corners, and then we won't have any gapping once the pieces are dried. And the reason I'm doing two pieces for the back and only one for the seat, because with the back we want that 5mm thickness to match the leg. With the seat, I'm just using one piece because we'll have the cushion on there as well. Squeeze those together like that and just find some more clamps. And these clamps are really useful. I can actually sell these in my Etsy store. There's a link to the store, I think, above. Pop those on there, one in each corner, like that. Make sure they're on straight. Okay, so that's those. Whilst they're drying, we can shape the leg pieces. Okay, so I've got a sheet of 120 grade sandpaper here. It doesn't have to be 120, but just something a little bit harsher. And then just take the leg and just hold it so that it's slightly angled away from the sheet of sandpaper, just very slightly, and then just pull that towards you. And what we're doing is we're just creating a slight bevel at the bottom of the leg there. Sort of hold it quite firmly against the paper, and then you can see that's just starting to sort of shape off. And then turn it over and do the opposite edge. And then you can do the remaining two edges. And it's just nicer than leaving it as a square. It gives it a little bit more of an elegant appearance. Oh, and the other one as well. then once you've done that and you're happy with the shape, you could just finish that off in your hand with a piece of finer grade sandpaper. And I use a 500 grade for sort of finishing things off. Okay, so do that with each of the legs, and then that then becomes the bottom of the leg. Okay, so I've shaped the end of each leg, tidied those up, and then the glue has now dried. That's been drying for about an hour and a bit. And then I've removed the clamps, and then on each piece just gone through and sanded each edge. So I've done all of these already, but I just show you, just go along the sandpaper in one direction like that. Don't rub it back and forth, as you'll sort of shear off the corners, you'll round off the corners. So just do that on each side. Make sure you've got a nice square piece, and then take the leg pieces and put a short leg either side of the long legs like that, and then have another piece of spare strip or something with a straight edge, and just push all those together. We're just getting them so that they're all even, so the bottom of each piece is all lined up. So just push them against the spare strip like that, and then take your sharp pencil, make sure I'm at the right angle for you there, they're all nicely pressed tightly up against that strip, and then we're just going to draw a line, bring you down a little bit there, so draw a line on the long leg level with the top of the short leg, just go across like that. That'll just help when we're attaching the side pieces. So get rid of the spare strip, and then put them into sort of sections, one long leg and one short leg, and we're going to attach the side piece to the top of the short leg, and then so it just sits below that line we've just done, and that means that we've got an even amount of leg here at the bottom. So I've got my glue here. I think it's just going a little bit tacky, but let me see if I've got, just take that top layer off. So apply glue to each short side of the side piece. Like that. So it's completely flush with the top of the short leg. Just press them together quite firmly. And then, so the top of the side piece sits just below that pencil line. And then press that together. You can just very carefully turn it round like that, give it a good squeeze, and then don't pick it up but just slide it along your worktop, and that can be left to dry, and then you can do exactly the same with the other side. It's always a good idea to have a couple of projects on the go, and then you're not sort of just waiting around for glue to dry. You can go off and do the next stage of another project. That's what I always do. I've always got sort of 2 or 3 things on the go. Press that together, and again slide that over there, and that bit can be left to dry, and then when we come back we'll actually construct the chair. Okay, so once again, once you've allowed enough time for the glue to dry, we're now going to actually construct the chair. So take the back piece, which is the joined pieces, and just apply glue along one edge, and this is square, so it doesn't matter which way you have the grain running. Put that down on your worktop, and then I'm going to attach this side so that the top of this back leg is level with the top of the back piece, like that. Just make sure you've got a nice straight line along that, what will become that top edge. I'm just going to get that spare piece of 5x5 strip again, and this just comes in handy when you want to just press something together like that so that it all stays nice and flush. Press that there like that, and then just let that dry just for a moment. Okay, so I left that just for about 1 minute because I don't want it to be solid. I'll show you why when we attach the base. So just apply glue to 2 adjacent edges. And then this will just sit at the bottom of that back piece, and so that it's flush with the bottom of the side piece there. Okay, and the reason I didn't want it to dry off completely is then you can just pull that side piece in to meet it, and it will square the whole thing off. And then push it all together, just using your finger to make sure it's all staying sort of flush at the bottom there. You should just start beginning to look something like a chair now. And then apply glue to these other side edges. And you can lay that down again, and this is going on in exactly the same way. Just turn that around that way. So make sure that, again, the back leg or the long leg is flush along the top there. Again, just squeeze it all together, and if you need to bring that spare strip in, do that. Just press it all together and press the sort of side piece here against the seat. And then what you can do is actually just use a little bit of masking tape just to hold that together as the glue dries. I always forget to cut this first, so I'll just quickly do it now while you're there. And then just very carefully sort of wrap a piece round that front edge. I'm sort of pulling quite tightly and pressing the whole thing together as I go. And I'm going to put another piece around the back edge as well. Like that. And you can put a piece around the top of the legs as well, just to hold that all together. Sort of come across there like that, and wrap one side first, pull it quite tightly, and wrap the other side around. And there's our chair, so I'm going to leave that to dry. Okay, so again I let the glue dry for a good few hours while I worked on something else, and then I've sanded the chair on all sides. So again, with the sandpaper flat on your worktop, you can hold it on all sort of sides and just go around in circular motions. And I've already done this, so I'm not doing it now because it just makes a horrible noise on the sound. So do it on all sides, the back as well, and then you can use just a piece of sandpaper in your hand to go along the back and underneath as well. You get nice flat surfaces everywhere. And then when you've had a good sand like that, just use a nice soft brush and just dust all the sanding dust away. Always wear a mask when you're sanding, or make sure you've got a window open somewhere. I've already done this, so you can't see the sort of clouds of dust coming off, but that's just a good way before you start varnishing or painting, which we're going to do to the legs now, just to make sure you haven't got all that grit still sort of sitting on the surface there. Okay, so like I say, I'm going to varnish mine because mine is for a log cabin and the rest of the furniture is in a sort of dark oak varnish, so I'm going to do the legs in that same colour. But if you're sort of using a nice pastel fabric or something, then obviously paint, use a nice pastel coloured paint. And as the tops of the sort of legs are going to be covered, you don't have to be really neat at the top, so just do a nice coat on each of the legs, but don't worry if you're sort of going over onto the base of the chair or anything, because that's all going to be covered. And I'm going to do 2 coats on here, which is what I've done with the other pieces of furniture, so obviously I want this to match. And I just let the first coat dry off, and then I apply, I gently sand it, and then I'll apply the second coat, and you get a nice sort of rich finish. Okay, so the actual body of the chair is now complete, and we can now start the upholstery. So you'll need some of this wadding, I think it's called wadding, But as you can see, this one is a little bit thick, so I like to pull, it's made up of sort of 2 layers, and I pull the 2 layers apart, and then one layer is just actually thick enough for what we need. So I don't know, that's probably, I don't know, 3 or 4 millimeters thick, 1/8 of an inch thick. So around about that thickness. I've got a piece here that I've separated. And we're going to begin by covering the inside back of the chair and along this top edge. We're going to do along the arms as well and along that front bit. And it's just to give them the look of sort of having a bit of padding in there rather than looking too flat. So begin by cutting a piece that's the size of the back and then just a little bit extra, and that's the bit that will be curling over that top edge. And you can use your chair to measure all the way along, and we'll be doing that throughout with the wadding and the fabric. Just go down to about there. It's easier than me sort of giving you measurements for each individual piece of fabric. We'll just sort of do it as we go along. Okay, so that will fit in there and then just wrap over the back, but we just need to cut out a little strip at each side to allow for the arms. So just cut just above the arm and then snip that corner away. You can lay that back on there and do the other side. So you've got a sort of T shape with a fat top. Like that. So apply glue to the inside back of the chair. You've probably got a little bit too much on there. Very, very fine, this wadding, so you don't need too much glue. Let me just spread that out and then get rid of a little bit. And then just a little bit along that top edge as well. And then you can just attach your piece of wadding. And again, you don't need too much glue, because when this wadding picks up the glue, it can become a little bit crispy. And that makes it sort of quite hard. So if you've got any sort of extra, just trim that off. And again, we will have as we go along, so we're not sort of measuring and cutting exactly. Press that down along there. And it's quite loose, that's okay, because the fabric will sort of hold it in place somewhat as well. And we're going to do the same thing along each of these arms. So again, just measure against the arm, and then cut a sort of thin strip. Like that, and we need 2 of those. And be prepared as well to get quite messy doing this, where we're sort of pressing the fabric against the glue. It will soak into your fingers, but don't leave it on your fingers and pick it off when it dries. Or sort of keep washing your hands. And if you don't, bits will sort of come off and stick to the fabric, and they'll be there forever then. People will be saying, what's that hanging off that chair? It looks like a piece of skin. Okay, just press that down. Again, quite loose. Just snip off any bits that are hanging over too much. And then same thing again along that front edge. And this is where it's a good idea to keep all of your little scraps, because you only need tiny pieces for projects like this. So rather than putting it in the bin, just have a little box or a tin or just something where you can keep all the little bits. And that piece along there, like that. So we'll leave that just to dry off for a moment while I go and get my fabric. Then we'll start the fun part. Okay, so I've just put this piece of card down on my work surface, and that means that the material just doesn't snag on any of the little nicks in the cutting mat. So I'm using this checked fabric. So if you're using a check or a stripe, just as we go along, you need to bear in mind that you'll need to line those up on the different areas of the chair. That will sort of become clearer as we go along. With this sort of pattern that's repeating, it's quite easy because you just move it over a fraction just to make sure they line up. If you're using something floral, it doesn't matter. You don't really have to pay attention to that. So the first bit we're going to do is along the front of the chair. So you need to cut a piece that's the width of the chair, as we're going to make a hem at either side, and quite long. That's going to sort of curl over the front and the bottom. So you'll want sort of, I don't know, 15 millimeters. I'm trying to think what that is in inches. Just over half an inch to go over the seat and the bottom. So once you've cut that piece, just begin by gluing down just a small hem at each side. Again, I'm just applying the glue with my cocktail stick, and you can use fabric glue, but I find that the wood glue and any sort of PVA you've got will do this as well, will work with fabric. But you can just sort of give that a try before you start. Just have a little experiment which of your glues work best. You want something that's quite fast drying as well. It means you don't have to keep waiting in between applying. And then just fold that over. And press down. This is where your fingers start getting sticky. That side as well. Make sure you don't fold over too much, as you'll lose the width that you need. Or if you want to do a bigger hem, just cut a wider piece of fabric. Like that. And then I'm actually going to apply the glue to the chair. So just along that seat part. And this can get a bit messy as well, because you're sort of obviously picking up the wadding as you go. Okay, then lay the chair down. And then you can lay that piece across the front. When you're upholstering, try not to pull sort of too tightly. You want to sort of keep it firm but nice and even, so that you haven't sort of got ridges, you know, along the front there. You want it to be nice and smooth. So just sort of press that down with your fingers, but try and keep it even. Okay, so there's our first piece. Okay, so next, cut a piece of fabric that's the thickness of the side piece, and we just want it to wrap around this back corner, so that's actually enough to do both corners. So 2 pieces like that, and we're just going to lay that around the back corner like that. So, I don't know, probably got about half an inch each side, but it's just to cover up this thickness of the leg. I do have it a little bit wider. I'll just pop a bit more glue on my card. If you can hear a squeaking, that's my chair. I keep meaning to oil it, never get around to it somehow. Just onto the back like that. Just just curl that around there and make sure that it's right down to the bottom of the side piece. And we'll do the same on the other side. Okay, we're now going to cover this inside back area. So for the piece of fabric, lay your chair onto it. I probably got a bit too much there, but if you do it, you know, a little bit extra at the bottom and top, so probably 3/4 of an inch, and the same again at either side. So you've got a good sort of spare piece of fabric around all sides there. Like I say, that's probably too much, but we can always trim some off. And then lay the fabric on the inside, making sure, again, if you've got stripes, that they're lining up with the ones already in place at the front, and sort of shape it into the sort of shape of the chair, so make it into a sort of inverted square, like that, a bit tricky. And we want to cut away a square in each corner so that we can then fold these upper flaps around the back. So once you've got it in place like that and it's lined up pattern wise, I want to make a little hem on the piece of fabric that will come around here. If you've got a sort of nice thick cotton fabric that doesn't fray, then you can just cut to the height of the arm, so you sort of cut across there. But if you've got something like this that frays very easily, you'll need to do the little hem. Okay, so I've got enough of a flap there, so just below the arm, I'm going to go in like that. And then I don't want to go all the way back, so I'm going to leave probably about, I don't know, 3mm again. So I don't want the gap to be too small. I'd rather have too much fabric than not enough. And then you can actually just take that out and do it on the other side, identical to what you've done there. So fold your fabric, cut that slit again, and then you can get rid of those squares. Like that. Now just cut a tiny little slit above this sort of centre section like that. Then we can use that to make our hem. I'm just going up to that line. So apply glue along the back of each of those little flaps, little sections. That side as well. And then fold those over. If you've got a pattern, make sure that it's running from side to side. I think mine was a little bit wonky, so I've cut a longer slit there so that that's folded on a line. So we'll sort of be making small adjustments to make sure everything's correct. And I'm just going to try that again. And that will fold around like that. Okay, so I'm going to apply a line of glue to the back of the seat. To put a little bit up the inside of the arms. And then to the top of the arms. And then just a line along the back of the top of the seat. Like that. And then pop the piece into place. And then sort of bring these side pieces around, not pulling too tightly, but sort of tight enough so that that sort of back piece isn't puckered. And I'm also trying to line these up like that, and the same on the other side. I just want to get rid of that wadding from, so that it doesn't stick out of the join. Like that. Make sure you keep the piece upright as well. And then just trying to push that back a little bit so the back isn't tight. And you've got time to do that as well before the glue starts to dry. And this bottom of this will all be covered, so don't worry about how this seat area looks. Push it back too along that arm join. If you can't get in there with your fingers, use the end of a paintbrush, works quite well. And then this top flap is actually a little bit too long, so I'm going to trim some of that off. You want to leave a good sort of 3/4 of an inch. Again, if you've got a stripe or a check, you can follow the line. Like that. And then if you imagine that was sort of boxed off above those, the sides, the legs at the sides there, we now want to cut down that line. So we're going to cut a flap that runs sort of parallel to the leg. And again, if you've got checks or stripes, that helps. So I just want to cut down there onto the top of the side piece. You can feel it with the tip of your scissors there. And that will be going in there like that, and then cut the flap or cut the line again at the back of the leg. So we're cutting a flap of fabric, there will be sort of a continuation of the thickness and the line of the leg. And do that on both sides. And then these flaps at the back can come off. Like that. And just apply a little bit of glue on the end of each of those strips. Not too much, because we'll be sort of pulling that flap over to hold them in place. But just a little tiny bit on each. And then you want to bring those in and stick them along the back of the seat. And then we'll be bringing that down over the top. So what I want to do is just put a little blob of glue on each corner. Like that. I'm just going to actually apply a bit more glue along that top. And this back all looks very messy at the moment, but we will be putting a piece over the back to cover all this up. So just go across like that. And then pull down. And I'm trying to keep that line there straight, and then I know that it's even at the front as well. And where you've got these little corners, let's get a new cocktail stick there. You can actually feed a little bit in the end of your cocktail stick like that. If you've got any little frayed bits, you can push those in and then squeeze that together again. And that gives us a nice corner. Same on that side as well.